Welcome to another edition of Throwing Down Some Heavy Light. I'm always Byndon, the chair of MORE, and I'm going to just give you a backdrop of what we're going to do tonight. We're going to have a Colene Hinchey, who's going to be talking with me in an interview for the first 30 minutes or so. And then we're going to open it up to the participants' audience to raise questions or comments or discussions with her. And we may call an audible if we need to, maybe go a little bit longer, but we're going to basically try to stick to the 60 minutes if we can. And I'm going to give a brief introduction. We do have an evaluation at the end of the program, and for those of you who don't know about MORE, is Movement in Omaha for Race Equity, and we're an anti-racist group and race equity, probably one only one in the state of Nebraska, but we primarily focus in Omaha at this point. And we have people from all over who participate in our activities. We've been doing this for many years and so on. So we're kind of excited about all of this at this point. So let me get into the introduction a little bit and then get right into the questions, because I know people have some other comments they want to share. But this is one of the first times in the history of Omaha, and I've been here almost all of my life, where we have a community advocate and a retired police official who have a candid conversation that talks about community police relations issues that have been historically been kept undercover. This increase, we have increasing crime, unsolved cases, basic racial demographic information that is not always readily available to the public, and it must be more forthcoming in our community. During the second half, as I said, of the program, we're going to have a little bit of chance for you to deal with this. And I attended the Omaha 360 Empowerment Network meetings for about a year and a half, and we didn't have a lot of these kind of things going on in a sense back then. And so this is kind of the way we can have that candid conversation. We believe that any taxpayer-funded entity should have public accountability and transparency. And we will discuss the Blue Shield and the Internal Affairs Unit in the Omaha Police Department in terms of issues tonight. Just a little backdrop on Colene. Hinchey is a retired police captain from the Omaha Police Department, and she's how can I describe it? She's worked for 23 years before she left the force. We heard about her from First Sky, a morning program about a month ago, where she was on there and she had a number of questions. I was somewhat disappointed in their probing questions, and also there was not much of a follow through. So I decided to invite her on to MORE's program to talk more about that. I will say they did raise some relevant questions, but again, it was almost like, what do you do next? That didn't really even come up on what you would do as a community. So we want to put a little bit more of that emphasis in the program today. And as we say, Colene, welcome to Throwing Down Some Heavy Light, and we'd like to continue this conversation. So without much further ado, I always throw out to our guests, tell with the participants or the viewing audience a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll get directly to the questions, other questions.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for having me and hosting me here. It's been a journey, and this has been probably the highlight of it. So thank you.
Welcome.
A little bit about me. I retired in 2019. I retired out of protest with Chief Schmader's failure to discipline a lieutenant that worked directly for me. I felt that I could no longer work for the city, and I did not trust in Todd's leadership, and I chose to retire instead of having to work another day with him.
Okay.
So I kind of started an accidental advocate journey that led me to you, sir. So
good. Welcome. Good. Now, on your website, it's called Blue Snitch, and basically the website deals with this Blue Shield effect. Talk to us a little bit more. What is this Blue Shield is about, and maybe just a little bit more on the website.
Yeah. So when I tried to, so I had a issue when I was doing Freedom of Information Acts. It started after I retired. I found out around a campfire of all places about a couple of cops that might have possibly searched a cell phone illegally in an attempt to get a date. And I found out that those two officers, which was Officer Ben Weiner and Officer Michael Kurd, received minimal punishment for those offenses. And so I set on a journey doing FOIA requests, and which are Freedom of Information Act requests. And what I kept getting was a brick wall. And Deputy Chief Michelle Bang, who was over internal affairs at the time, she attempted to persuade me not to file my FOIA request via her personal email to my personal email as a private citizen at this point. And I felt like, okay, I've had enough now. Now the deputy chief of internal affairs reaching out to me, telling me not to do these Freedom of Information Act requests. So what ended up was Blue Snitch. And as I wrote bluesnitch.com, the website, I felt like that was the only way to get my voice heard because the police department was systematically silencing me. I thought about what it meant and what the internal affairs unit was doing. And I took it upon myself to kind of develop this blue shield effect that I kind of coined the term for. And how I describe it is like, it's a systematic cover up of internal affairs units, but also the way that police report crimes and who they choose to report for and how they choose to report it can also silence victims. So if you're the victim of a crime and the cop was the suspect, if we don't take a report, then that crime essentially never occurred per se. So I coined the term blue shield effect in the way that it's a system of shady internal affairs practices and non-transparencies with discipline in conjunction with selective report taking and report writing, which then basically has an extreme effect on the community and silencing victims and not having transparency. So it kind of all stemmed from that.
Yeah, Colleen, no, I reviewed your webpage and there were questions about why now and what do you hope to accomplish in your advocacy? Also, are you open to work with other individuals and groups on this police reform? Because I understand you've been doing a lot of this by yourself.
Yes. And again, why now I think is I actually started this almost immediately upon retiring. So it's been, I think I started my website in 2020. So it's been up and active for about 2 years now, but it's just been kind of finally, I felt emotionally in a place where I could start really pushing it on social media. And so then Twitter was born, and shout out to Dan who's helped me with my Twitter immensely. And so it kind of just like gradually grew from there. But my whole goal is just to be a community resource. I am alone doing that. I've had some people reach out, but I'm a one woman unpaid volunteering machine that I do the best I can with given the resources I have. So
but you are open to work with other people in other words.
Absolutely. That's what I'm here for.
Now, I noticed that in your internal affairs report, you had many allegations. Some of them was comical, crazy, the kind of dysfunctional stuff that happens in a crazy organization. Many of those cases were not addressed in a fair manner. You dropped some heavy data in there that was not shared in my North Omaha engagement meetings. And by the way, when I was at the meeting, I used to always ask the chief a question. He was always say, "I'll get back to you," but he never got back to me. And
right.
Basically the information they didn't share in those 360 meetings. But I noticed you were able to find out about the discipline of bad cops. We do have bad cops. Why is that information not readily available to our community or the public when it's obvious we got some bad cops or some shaky characters on the force? And we just got to hear about the one clown who threw the garbage on a woman's car, that kind of stuff. But apparently there's things like that been happening for years, and we've covered it up in Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah, I think that part of the problem right now is that we are dealing with a time when the chief is scared of optics, and so he wants to portray that things are going well. And I think that if he continues to throw this transparency only breeds mistrust, or lack of transparency only breeds mistrust. And so I think that if Todd can step up these the accuracy and here, let me break it down this way. 81% of citizen complaints, which were filed by you as citizens, ended up being exonerated or they were found unfounded. So 81% of, I believe, 126 out of 156 allegations were found to be not guilty in essence. So 81% of the allegations that the citizen says, you just don't know what you're talking about, or it's not relevant, or now I'm not saying there aren't some ones that are made up. I'm not saying that there aren't some unfounded charges, but 81% of you guys, every 81%, that is like a huge number. And then if you go into the second half of that, which is internal affairs can be filed by citizens, which is, you know, the public, but then there are internal investigations that are filed by other employees or officers who would want to complain. Like as a captain, I wrote up Amy Otter, who is the reason why I left. I wrote her up in an internal investigation. And what I found with that is that there were things like, so in 2020, there was a officer, I'm going to read it for you directly from my notes. They were found guilty of bias-based profiling, racism, discrimination, zero tolerance / mayor's executive language and respect for others. They absolutely got found guilty of that. They received 5 days of a suspension, which means that they, in essence, got about a $1,200 to a $1,500 fine. But that fine can be broken up over pay periods. So you only get maybe a $300 fine, one pay period, or another for being found guilty of zero tolerance racial biasing. So combination of not doing a thorough investigation as far as some complaints, but then look at the outcomes of the severities of the ones that were actually found. And so when you take the combination of those two, that's where you really get into the muck of why police are, the blue line just keeps getting moved. And I think that's where we need to start from there.
Colleen, the other thing that I would be willing to bet some money, if not the mortgage, a lot of times these police officials don't get back to the victims or the people who have the complaints. Because again, when you got some of these numbers, I don't know that. I've never heard of anyone talking about, oh, they came back and had this conversation, say we found the officer in a certain situation. I'm going to switch up a little bit and ask you.
I will correct you on that. You get a letter back from them telling you what they say, what they found, but they don't necessarily tell you more than that.
What they did to the officer, in other words.
No, they don't tell you results. They just tell you whether or not they were found exonerated, sustained, or not sustained. They just tell you the result.
Yeah, and that's not sufficient for someone.
Right. So you think my complaint got found, but then they end up getting a written reprimand.
Yeah,
so
and I can't believe that people have that sense of intelligence or lack of intelligence to know that community need more than that tokenistic type thing that they do. Now, in your webpage, you took the prisoners, you threw some heavy shade or dropped some shade, and you exposed some light and malfeasance on some of those people in the administration. Have you encountered any feedback from former colleagues? And the reason I say that is because whenever there's an incident in the community, I've known over the years, police officers used to go up and beat up people. Like let's say a police officer was murdered or shot or whatever, they were beat up or hit and all that stuff and tortured. And then I remember when the last incident happened with the policewoman, the police chief came out and emphatically said there will be no retaliation by the police officer. So for him to say that gives credit to historically in this community, we know many people have been beaten up by police officers and haven't been dealt with. Again, it's one thing to catch the victim, or the victim get some kind of perpetrator get arrested and dealt with, but to go out and beat innocent citizens up just because they belong to the same racial group or live in the neighborhood is unacceptable. We know that has happened historically in Omaha. But my question to you is, did you get any pushback from the stuff that you're doing?
Oh, yes. I basically, there are a few brave souls that still talk to me, but I would say it can be counted on 2 fingers.
What you mean? We got over 800,
no, I mean, like literally, there's only 2 people out of 800 that still talk to me. And so I would say that was a substantial cut in my friendship pool. Yeah, there's like 2 brave souls that still talk to me.
Well, and I hear what you're saying, because I tell the story. I worked for Captain Cherries, and when I left there, and also promise you'd be surprised the so-called friends who reach out to you afterwards, who are friends at work or buddies, and then they act like you're a pariah, and they won't call you or say anything to you, even though you were righteous and dealing with some of the cesspools in the organization.
I can tell you that I got threatened with lawsuits more after I retired than I ever did while I was working. Let's just
Wow. Now, we'll come back to that a little bit later. I've been following the case of sexual harassment by Captain Kathy Bell Castro Gonzalez. It was in the newspaper. Apparently, they found the police department guilty of sexual harassment. I've known a police officer, some of them over the years, and they told me there's a lot of sexual healing or people who chasing rump roast in the department. In other words, officers got some real issues dealing with their sexual behaviors as professionals, and particularly some of those who are married. I say that very emphatically because I've heard some internal as well as external people tell me that. My question to you, is there inappropriate behavior or sexual harassment you've noticed in the department when you were on the force?
Yes, I was personally sexually harassed and tried to report it. Bruce Farrell worked for me when I was in the gang unit, and he made some disparaging comments about me, and I tried to report it. And they basically told him, they disciplined him for talking about me, but they did not do anything with my sexual harassment complaint. And then also, as being a gay woman, when I first came on, there was definitely some bigotry as far as my sexuality goes. I want to give a shout out to Ben Gray for protecting my rights as a human. Because when I came on, I was scared to, we had to take polygraphs when you get hired. And so we were all scared, all the people who were gay, we kind of knew each other, and we were scared that we were going to get polygraphed about what I did in, as far as who I loved. And we were actually trying to figure out ways we could get around that polygraph so that I could still get hired and work for the city as a public servant just because I was gay. So that was a very big stressor. But over the years, I mean, I don't think that there's not a woman on that police department that hasn't come in some form of either glass ceiling or being dismissed, having telling us that, like giving better investigative jobs to other people. I mean, there's rampant. There's a lot of type A men there, and they are threatened by strong women. And so that happens a lot.
Colene, are you open to share? Because you talked a little bit what the actual officer did to you. You're okay with sharing a little bit of the details of your sexual harassment with the
Yeah, I don't mind at all.
Tell us that.
It was during a meeting. So when I was in the gang unit, they would buy they would make t-shirts at times that weren't necessarily always appropriate. I would say that. And they were talking about what size I would wear and what size shirt would fit over my breasts, which is not the word that they used. And they was talked about my breasts in a demeaning manner, and I wasn't there, and it was to a group. It was everybody on my crew that worked for me. I was the sergeant, and they were talking about my anatomy in a public meeting, and I didn't find it very appropriate.
And what became of that complaint at the end of the day to resolve it for you?
He had to keep working. I was forced to keep working for him, or for him. I was forced to still have him as an employee. He got written up for talking about me, not specifically about that. He was instructed to stop gossiping, and he got in trouble for gossiping. And then he went on to become the police chief out at Wahoo, and he was recently relieved of duty for some indiscretions that he filmed on his own body-worn camera.
You couldn't make this stuff up. You got some real idiots working around here. Now,
yes.
Let me go back to this, and this sounds kind of strange, but I've been following the guy who is considered, we see him as a union guy, but you said there's something like a fraternal order, police association or something. So
yes.
But Tony Connor, I remember seeing him in the bed. He was close to death with COVID, and his wife came on begging for people to pray for him, and he was kind of a nut job in terms of the way he talked about people in the community. And I say it because he's a public figure, so I can say he's a nut job, what he said, and just very disrespectful, and particularly as an African-American. And I noticed that he's made some outlandish comments over the years. He kind of whines also. And I noticed that you had some letters to share some of your concerns about him. How tight is the union or this group you call the Fraternal Order of Police, whatever association, with the department? Are they one and the same? Because they sometimes look like they're advocating for each other, and it's particularly him. This guy's he shouldn't even be on the force with his language that he uses as a public servant.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you a little breakdown of what OPOA is, and that means is Omaha Police Officers Association, and it used to be formerly the police union. but it is now basically a labor bargaining unit. It's not technically a union per se. And what they do under Article 26 of the labor contract allows the city to appoint a full-time position with your taxpayers' dollars that does nothing but run the union or the OPOA. And so his sole job is to advocate for police officers and their contract rights. And so when I started Blue Snitch, little Tony decided to send me 15 letters threatening me that he was going to sue me. And I responded back with a resounding no. And what I didn't know at the time is that when I got the 15 letters, it was from individual police officers. So it looked like each officer that I had on my wall of shame was threatening to sue me. And I was like, okay, well, they don't quite understand anti-SLAPP suits and SLAPP, the laws that we have here in place in Nebraska. And so I responded back, and I carried on with my life. And just within the last year and a half, so there a year about, I found out that I talked to one of the officers, and they actually never even asked them if they wanted to threaten me with a lawsuit. Tony Connor just took it upon himself to write these letters, had Mike Dowd, his lawyer, just send me union letters from the union, never mentioning that they were from the union, never mentioning that they were representing the union, and actually pretended to represent each officer. So Tony is, I'm not Tony's biggest fan. Tony, I have 2 open internal affairs investigations against him right now. And Precious McKenzie, that was me that filed that IA complaint against Tony Connor. Hi, Tony. Anyway, Tony likes to threaten people, and he doesn't like that I exposed his 911 call, and he is threatened by me. So
well, I suspect
I'm not gonna lie, it brings me a little joy. I don't like insecure men who are threatened by honest women. Is it's yeah.
There's an expression we use oftentimes. If you live in a glass house, you shouldn't throw rocks. And
oh yeah,
unfortunate when I look at some of the stuff that he said in the past few years. And I was actually, he was in a meeting, and I'm not going to mention the person who's there.
He throws boulders, by the way.
Yeah, he was with Hanson, and he was with somebody else who I work with, and she told me that Hanson reached over and tapped him on the leg and told him to shut up, and he was very polite and nice in this meeting, but again, it was contrary that he was almost like he spoke when he needed to be spoken to in a certain way. I'm gonna switch. I
didn't answer your question though. Do I think they're tight? Yes. He reports, when you look at the organizational chart for the City of Omaha Police Department, under the chief, it goes internal affairs unit, Anna Colone, and then another little side venture is the union president, which is Tony Connor.
So in other words, these guys are sitting around changing.
He reports directly to the chief.
Yeah, the reason I know that is because when I was at a meeting, 360 meetings, I asked the chief a question about the union or this fraternal order of police or, these kind of blue line personalities. And he says, they don't speak for us. I'm like, give me a break. The guy's got the uniform on. And again, wink, wink. I've been around enough nonprofits and organizations and bureaucratic systems where they don't know each other, but also they start to say the same kind of news thing, or they use the same kind of cliches of language. So again, I knew it was not quite accurate, but again, I couldn't say in front of the folks that I had some inside information that these guys were tighter than bed bugs.
Well, Mayor Gene and Todd are the ones that appoint him. So
wow, painful. So the mayor appoint that kind of personality?
It is in the contract that the city, and I believe that last time I checked, she might be in St. Louis, but last time I checked, Gene was still running the city, and that's the last time I checked, because I can't find her. I keep requesting a meeting and she won't. Gene,
well, she's probably in St. Louis.
Gene, come talk to me, Gene, please, Gene.
Right. Well,
Gene.
You know how it is. We got some dysfunctional situation. I'm still mad about the fact she had these town hall meetings and she didn't have one in North Omaha, even though she got.
Wait, she had a town hall meeting?
She had 3 or 4 lined up, and the closest she came to North Omaha was somewhere down close to the Nicholas Street over on 16th or 15th Street. And when some functionary said, "Oh, that's North Omaha," I'm like, "Are you serious?" There's a lot of places in North Omaha, including the Highlanders, she could have met. She could have met at Metro in North Omaha. But the fact is, she's going to have town hall meetings, and she won't come to where we got a significant number of folks who have concerns about crime and issues. So, you shouldn't even have it. Plus, they should have made it a Zoom meeting, because some people would like to go that because of COVID-19 and so on. I'm going to switch up, and because I know there's a lot of folks who may want to raise some of their own questions, and I need to give them adequate time. Many in the African-American and Latino community have called for the public safety auditor because it was abolished under Mayor Fahey, who was a Democrat and a so-called friend of the people. And I do know we've had 2 African-American police chiefs in that time and never got reinstated. I know that they dislike Tristan Bond. She's now late. She's passed, as we say, to the spirit world. She moved to Colorado after she left Omaha. What ideas do you have that we can deal with this transparency in public funded entities such as the government? Because I get tired of paying my property tax and state tax and everything, and I get no representation. I don't get any responses to my letters. And I'm talking about not emails, but I mailed hard copies letters to many of these professional functionaries or administrators or even elected officials, and no response. So my question is, what can we do to deal with accountability from the police department in light of we have not seen it since we lost the public safety auditor probably over 10 years ago or 15 years now?
Well, I think that in premise that the police auditor was a good idea for oversight, but I think that we're limiting ourselves, and like you're not thinking high enough. I think we need to develop a law that would go statewide as far as law enforcement accountability. If in my head, I envision it like we already report numbers, all law enforcement agencies already report numbers through the Crime Commission. So why not have the Crime Commission just post those numbers that we already are keeping track of and just share them on a state level? So not even Omaha, who has a large majority, a larger department of like 800, you even have to then talk about the small town out in Chadron or the small police departments, because you can't tell me that there's not issues in those small downtown departments, and like just check out Wahoo and Bruce Farrell. Hey, but anyway, I think we need to go start there, have Crime Commission do that. But I also think that we need to have an appeals process, because right now the mayor's CRC is the Citizen Review Board is a complete farce.
But many of them quit years back because they got tired of the buffoonery, the incompetence of how that system worked. Plus, there was no teeth in their
there
bite.
was nothing. I appealed a decision a couple years back when I started all this, and it went nowhere. And I said, "Well, what were the results?" And they said, "We received your letter, and that's it." And then it was like, "Okay, what's the results?" And they said, "Can't tell you." And I was like, "Can you tell me if you agreed with me or disagreed with me?" And they just said, "Nope, we can't talk about it." And it was like, I even FOIA'd that, and they were like, "No, we can't." And I'm like, "Oh my word, this is a dog chasing its own tail right here." So, but in my vision, I see that if we took like an appeals arm under the Attorney General, since they don't have any criminal ends, but if we allowed each department to still have their independent internal departments, but have those results reported to the Attorney General's office for audit, but also have a means that we can monitor hiring, monitor firing, monitor discipline. The Giglio list is a huge one. And I think if we had a way, if with that transparency, and then also a better way to have an appeals process for those 81% that didn't get found, I think if we combine those two, we could probably have an achievable and also sustainable oversight that would not just put the onus on the city or have somebody report to the mayor, take them out of the equation and put it up at a higher level. Now, I know that seems scary, but I would also recommend then those have community members that sit on that appeals board through the Attorney General office. So you're not just talking about a government agency, or you're talking about civilian and community oversight as well. So I think that we don't just hit the city, let's go bigger, because there's issues in small towns as well.
By the way, we're getting right close in and we're gonna let the audience in, but I want to
Sure.
raise something. I had a chance for the first time in my life to go inside the FBI building in Omaha last year. And what I found amazing was the way that they operated. There are very few people of color who work there, obviously. But at one time when I talked to the what they call the guy who's in charge, uh, he said something like, "We investigate the Omaha Police Department." And I kind of tried to follow up with him, but it was almost like I was speaking a different language. And again, the FBI has some very shady characters over the years, from their head of their J. Edgar Hoover to how they dealt with Malcolm X and how they dealt with Martin Luther King. Even now we see the chief, the head of the FBI was at a hearing in Congress, and he lied and said he had an important business meeting to go to, and he went on a vacation. And so they're mad at him. But again, the FBI is not always the friends of people of color, and particularly working class people, because there's a lot of spying that goes on internally. And again, we know that they got a lot of informers of people that don't deal with people in a healthy way. But my question or my point is that how can we address many of these issues? And also, do you have any closing feedback before we turn it over to the audience?
Well, I think that we really need to go with things that are attainable at the moment. We're never going to be able to change a culture immediately overnight, but we need to start chipping away with that veil of secrecy. And I think truly by starting with the numbers end of it, and really, like, if we were saying, hey, listen, cops aren't perfect, we all have bad days, we're all rude, and yeah, we get in car accidents sometimes, and yeah, and things like that. But at the same time, if something really messes up, we have to be able to say, okay, Omaha is going to come forward and say, hey, this person messed up and we're dealing with it, and we don't speak for them, or this is not how we approve it. But instead they take the tone of, oh, we can't let anyone know what's going on because they might think that we're bad. And it's like, my tone is like, without you sharing that, they already think you're bad. So it's like, we actually are pretty good, but you won't know it because they won't let that curtain down. And I think if we start there and start these conversations and actually tell you what's going on back there, one, it's not going to be as scary to you, but I also think that we as the officers won't feel so worried about being vulnerable with you, and then it won't be such a big front. So yeah. But I would encourage anyone. I'm going to be updating my 2020 and 19 stats are on my website, which is bluesnitch.com. And then follow me on Twitter. I like to stay up on the current events. I am snarky at times and quite witty, as my mother would say. I would recommend follow me on Twitter for more of the current things, but I am going to be updating my statistics in that to include my 21 numbers, which are on my Twitter feed right now. But if you want to get my newer data, it's on Twitter, but my older data is on the website. But again, next few weeks, I'm going to be updating that all together and get it all updated and meshed together. So,
Colene, we got a number of questions that came in not only in Facebook, but also in our chat. And one of them says, use the term Blue Shield, that you represent the systematic cover up in the department issues surfaced by internal affairs, including, so I guess they're asking a bit more, what else is with that? I may not be clear on that comment.
Well, like I said, I think.
Hold on just a second. Karen, you want to let Karen say something to that?
I'm going to jump in because I was laying out what she had said represented her term, your term, Colene, of Blue Shield. So my question really was, are there police departments that are doing this work better? And, what's sort of the gold standard? I understand what you're saying about starting small here, but what's the gold standard?
I think for me, I have not seen, I think part of the problem, Karen, is that IAs are sometimes only as good as contracts allow. And so if you have a strong negotiating arm like our OPOA, you're going to have, like they negotiated while I was on, to be able for the chief to solely determine whether or not an internal affairs investigation was kept into a line investigation, which means it's handled by command and can only be given a reprimand, or you can send it up to internal. And so it's small things like that. If we could take that reprimand clause or that line investigation clause out of the next contract, well, boom, there's an automatic like first step. But is there a gold standard? No, I haven't seen it. I'm I'm trying, as a person that's coming from a little bit different perspective, to try to think of ways to the best do that for the city of Omaha and the state of Nebraska. And what I proposed just a little bit ago is probably the best thing I can think of that could get done immediately. Now, what's the gold standard? Complete, like, everything's out there, but at the same time, we also have to respect HR. I mean, there's people that have health issues, and we don't, there's boundaries that we have to figure out, but we can't start until we actually start discussing what the actual boundaries are. So
Colleen, you have probably about 4 questions jumping out at you real quick. One of them says something about who's coming up for the 911 call that Tony Strange's wife made about him. Apparently he's got some domestic issues or something, and I know when it goes to 911, is that stuff supposed to be public information when he's having some
should be
narrative?
When how
Can they
I
cover
got
that up though? Can they hide that from people?
They tried to hide it from me, but I was persistent. I was the one that it took me 4 requests, and I got sent to 911. They told me I had to ask the police department. The police department told me that it's not up to them. I have to ask 911. So I go back to 911 and had to copy the police department, and then I had to show them that each one of them was sending each other to the other. And so then I finally said, I need to know what I need to take to the ACLU, give it to me. And then they said, oh, never mind. All of a sudden it's okay to give it to you. And then I got it. And so it's like, if you don't, they wear you down into hoping that you're going to give up in the efforts to give you vague information that will not shed light on everything. And half the stuff they shouldn't even be scared of to share. And that's what's so amazing to me. It's like, sometimes they're actually doing really good. I mean, sometimes they do. Sometimes Todd actually calls it right every now and then. And you're like, hey, praise that. But you can't, because it's like, no, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about anything. And it's like, no, when you talk about the bad, but you also open up that door to talk about the good. And so then that's where we need to build that relationship. And it's like, I think I mentioned to you the other day, it's like, we all know where to find the, how to complain on the website, right? But do you know that there's also where you can commend them is on there? There's attaboys on there that you can go online and do that as well. So I would encourage the city and community that if you have a positive experience, please write that person up as well, because it's not just about cop bashing, because they're my brothers and sisters and I love them, but we have to do a better job. We have to do a better job. We are getting paid to represent you, and there's information that you deserve, and they're just not sharing it. And Todd could do it. He's just choosing not to. So,
Colleen, somebody says, do you think defunding the police could be helpful to challenging in this culture?
No. I'm not for defunding the police at all. I'm for using the monies that we spend on police forces in a better, more compelling way. I think we need to tackle mental health reform. I'm a huge mental health advocate. I think we need to do some bail reform. We need to do legalize marijuana. There's a whole things that we do undue burden on underserved communities where they end up in the criminal justice system. And I think that we need to look at intensive programs for those with mental health issues and drug dependencies, because I don't think anybody should be in jail because they're mentally ill for the sole purpose of that, or for having a drug problem. And those things need to start now, but I just don't think that these conversations are happening on a productive level.
Somebody asked, if we can't change the culture, then what are the 3 things we can do right now?
We can start by, I'm gonna put together, I think, a white paper that regarding what I feel that could possibly get passed, and maybe a legislative bill this session. I believe it needs to go before them soon. I'm hoping to get the legislature involved, and maybe we can get something that, I think that the police departments are threatened because they think we're going to come in and like, if you do any kind of reform, then it's like, we're going to come in and nitpick but I think if we can just start with the data and slowly build there and start like the Giglio. So I don't know if you know what Brady Giglio is. It's when an officer has been determined to be unreliable to testify in court. So it's been found in court that even officers who have bad histories, that information has to be shared by the prosecutor if it's asked by the defense attorney, even if it's a cop. And then, so that was a whole court decision. So now under the law, Todd is required to keep a list of cops that fall on this Giglio Brady list. And those are cops that have been deemed because they have lied under oath, either in internal affairs, in court, or some other means, and they've been determined to be unreliable. We need to share that list straight up. Boom. And then why are those officers even working? If you're part of your main job description is to be able to testify and be reliable in court. So boom, they shouldn't even be there. So why are they still employed? And these are the things that I think could make significant changes in an immediate fashion that would help build trust while we're getting the laws and the reform passed, and to do a better job with that. So
By the way, did you use the term bigelow, or what?
Giglio, it's Brady Giglio. It's a court.
Oh, not Giglio. Okay.
Giglio, yeah. It's a court case.
Okay, got you. I have you a little confused there.
Yeah.
Okay, good. The other thing that somebody is raising the question here, I think, is one of the things is, let's say, how can we get access to these lists? Are you going to have this white paper out there? Is it going to be something that you're going to make on your website?
The white paper, I hope to. I've never done it before. This kind of came up since talking, since my Twitter's been taken off. People about asking me my opinion on things, and I'm like, why not put it down on paper? Okay, but that will be, hopefully I'll be able to do in the next few. But as far as where I go from here, it kind of depends on where people want to ride this journey with me and where I go from there. But yeah, I'm just kind of going with it and seeing where I'm needed and going there. But my goal is to kind of put my thoughts down on paper so that maybe we can work something into some kind of law that would just start there at least.
I've got a question about the crime commission, if you don't mind.
Sure.
That's a public office, so its data should be public. What's going on with that data that it's not public? I don't understand that.
Well, that's part of the, like, there's data that we have to report, but then some of it is like so whitewashed that it's like, so I have all the numbers from internal affairs, but what I get is, an officer, or not even an officer, but this allegation was charged on this date, and this was the outcome in the number of days. It doesn't tell me who, it doesn't tell me exactly what they did, it doesn't tell me any of that. And so all that stuff's at the police department, OPD, but what they report to Lincoln might be more around the lines of the FBI stats or like a discipline actions. But they do have, because law enforcement training center, they hold our law enforcement credentials because we have to be credentialed under the state. So all that's part of that credentialing. So that data is there. So that there is stuff that we should be able to glean, but I don't know why they're sharing it. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to start with there. It's like, we'll make them start sharing what they're supposed to be sharing, and they should have. So, and if Todd is not sharing that, but he's got it. And then he needs to be sharing it. And why isn't crime commission asking for it? It's like those are all things that it's like, but the data, there is not a police department in this state that does not keep track of hiring, firing, and discipline. There's just not possible.
Quick question on my part, and it sounds strange, but it's not. Tony Connors had an issue of this domestic violence. If, as a police officer, if you are married or have a relationship with someone and you get involved in developing domestic violence, could you lose your job automatically? Is there an appeal process? But it's kind of weird to see an officer who's beating up his significant other and then he's still walking around with a gun. So I thought there was something out there that puts them under a little bit more restraining situation so they don't be out there acting foolish and doing some stupid stuff.
Well, police officers are allowed the same privilege under the law, that they're not found guilty until their day in court. So we have to presume that if there's a domestic violence charge, they would have the same rights as anyone else. They are only found and have their gun removed under conviction, and not a charge. So they have to be found convicted, and then so again that protects them. But I remember at one time when I was I was fairly new. I'm not going to date myself, but I remember one police officer had to leave his gun at work, and then they left it in a file drawer, and then he'd come in, get his gun, go out on the street, work, and then have to leave his gun at work and then go home to his wife, which was very weird. So it's a very nuanced kind of thing. But yeah, you have to be convicted.
Now, one of the things that I noticed, and I know that police officers today make a pretty decent salary compared to back in the day, and I know it's a lot of them moonlighting. Is it possible to make more money as a moonlighting officer than what you make in your job? Because I see them, a lot of them are double dipping. Now, I'm not necessarily against that, but how does that work for our officers being able to work after working hours?
Well, I actually was in charge of that unit, so I actually know quite well. So under union contract, and then there's because Nebraska is a right to work state. We prior to me, so they didn't have an inspections unit prior to me taking over, and it was been a few years now. But you're supposed to apply to work off duty in a job, and then that place has to be approved on the off-duty work site. But once it's approved, then anybody who wants to apply there, unless there's some kind of discipline issue, they usually get it to do part-time job. Now, there's only so many hours you're supposed to work in a week in conjunction with your 40-hour work week that you have. So usually about 20 hours of extra work I think you're not supposed to put in more than like 6 hours a day at it. That's again, union contract stuff. So it comes down to, you could technically still put in like a 14-hour day and do that several times a week and get paid. But I would bet that there are people that do it more often than the 20 hours and just don't report it.
Got you.
You know what I mean?
Good.
And a lot of them are paid cash and that kind of thing. So, but we are a right to work state, and they're allowed to do that under the right to work under the state of Nebraska. So,
by the way, I think I read all the questions I could, basically as best as I could read with my OPS education. Are there any people out there who want to ask a question or directly talk to Colene? Open your mic up and talk directly. Raise your question or comment.
Hey, Colene, this is Paul Fireman. Hey, I was there's a couple things I wanted to ask you. Seems like the biggest hot button issue that you've been talking about is this invasion of, the abuse of the IT technology that they're using to invade the privacy of a cell phone.
well, that was one person one time that I know of. So
Yeah, and how that's dealt with, I guess, is the question. And seems like that hasn't gotten resolved. Is that what you're saying? That is really, no one's really ever addressed publicly. I don't even think the public is even aware of it. And I just think that needs to be publicized more. And the police department needs to be accountable for answering to that kind of thing. That invasion of privacy, and like you said, you don't even know the age of the victim. Could have been a minor.
right.
That's really, in terms of all the issues that I've been hearing you talk about, that seems like a slam dunk. That even Chief Schmatter is going to say, yeah, that's probably something we should be addressing a little more clearly to the community. But it's just kind of slid on by, and I just think that you're doing a real service by making sure that the community knows about it. That somebody could do that. I mean, they have the technology and the access to and the knowledge to invade somebody's phone. So if they're capturing phones for any kind of purpose, then what are the guidelines and who's supervising the use of that access to that private information? That seems like a pretty hot public issue that there needs to be more attention drawn to that. So I just want to throw that out there.
Well, yeah, and thank you for that, Paul. And nice to meet you, by the way. I think that all started, that particular case. It came down to Ben Weiner, the case that we're talking about. Officer Ben Weiner went to a kiosk at Walmart, and we get stolen phones or lost phones sometimes turned into that kiosk, that little machine that you sell your phone at, and it'll come back with a hit on the serial number. And so what ended up happening was he took the phone, he recovered the phone, and he realized there was a cute photo of a woman on the phone. And instead of booking it into property and following proper chain of evidence, he took it upon himself to go visit his friend, Mike Curd, up in the digital forensic unit, which is called. And he asked him to try to attempt to open the phone so he could find out who this girl was. And I was told that it was to possibly get a date kind of thing. Well, Mike Curd was fortunately for the girl not very good at his job and couldn't get the phone open, but we do have the technology. But normally what we do is we get search warrants. And we usually will go through the courts or, those type of things, like, again, search warrants. But he took it upon himself to circumvent that. And I know I have confirmed through personnel orders that Mike Curd, the gentleman per se that was up in the digital forensic unit, he did get 3 days of suspension and he was immediately put back up into the unit. And last time I heard, he's still up there right now. So he received a 3-day suspension and is still up, as far as I know, still searching phones.
Wow.
So,
painful.
that's a big one for me. And that's kind of what started that whole webpage. And I just couldn't stand by. And my heart sank when I found that out. And I just knew I had to do something. And then that kind of triggered the whole journey. So
Yeah, Colleen, I just think that that's the kind of thing that you should be having discussions with some city council people.
I did. I reached out to Amy Milton, everybody who was on and in 2019. I reached out to every single one of them.
So are you saying they did nothing?
Nothing.
Why? You know what? Quick, Paul,
And I even talked to them. They responded to me and I explained exactly what was going on. I had physical conversations with them. For those that answered, the rest of them didn't even answer me back, but I reached out to every single, and especially to Amy Milton, who was over the law enforcement end of it at the time.
You know, I want to interject something here, and I found it somewhat strange, but I wrote a letter, I think, but I'm not sure. During that whole conflict related to Black Lives Matter, I remember there was people went to the city council meeting to protest, and Amy Milton is my city council person. And I know she had one of those police flags things on her mouth as one of those for the COVID-19. And I'm saying, okay, you can do that in one regard, private, you have a right to freedom of speech, but I'm surprised to see a city council person do that. And again, would I argue that if the city council was an African-American with any intelligence or wherewithal to put Black Lives Matter on their face, I have not seen on and do it in Omaha, but I was a little wondered about that because it's almost like some of these folks who were talking about some of the challenges with the police department, but yet you got a city council person who's basically saying, I'm going to stand 99%. Regardless of whether a police officer is right or wrong with some symbolism. So we have to be careful with some of that when you're elected official because you got different people with different points of view. But anyway, I was surprised with that. But again, it was something I raised, I think in a letter. I'm almost sure I raised it to a number of people. But again, our city council is notorious for not always writing back, and same with our school board. By the way, we got about 7 minutes and I want to give other people a chance to make comments. There's been a number of folks who are here I thought may want to have a comment or something with Colleen.
Yeah, I want to say one last thing, Jamal. Colleen, I think it would be worth having a conversation with Flatwater Press or the World Herald, Henry Cords, Paul Hamill, Nebraska Examiner. I think they would be very interested in discussing that specific incident and the ramifications of that. And if
well, I reached out to World Herald, I reached out to the Examiner, I reached out to the Lincoln Star Journal, I reached out to the Reader, I've reached out to everybody. It's literally been a two-year journey of getting doors shut in my face.
Paul, the other thing I would say is a lot of those reporters know a lot of this stuff and they've looked the other way. And even when I worked down the county building, I found out a lot of stuff that went on that reporters were so in bed with some of the very people they should have been reporting on. Deal with
I don't want to say they're in bed. I don't want to give them that disrespect. I think that they struggle with trying to confirm this stuff as well. And so it's like when you talk about a retired cop who's angry at the police department, I get called the D word a lot, which is disgruntled. And so I think that I come off as like this angry, like ex-employee. And it's like, I wasn't disgruntled. I was disgruntled at top for being a bad boss, but I was very pleased with the police department. I enjoyed my job. I loved it. But when I became a private citizen, yeah, I'm disgruntled. And you should be too. And if you call me disgruntled, I will take that as a compliment, because if you're not disgruntled, then there's something seriously wrong. Because if you're okay with this job performance that Todd is doing, then we need to talk more, because you need to get a little bit more fired up about what's actually going on there.
And Colene, I would share a little bit different perspective. As someone who's been a lifelong resident and then working in the community, I've seen a lot of people who've had concerns, complaints, and have never addressed. I know police officers who beat up people, it was never dealt with or addressed. And so, you know, you as a former police officer have a different perspective, but there's some of us who have been oppressed victims of this police department for years. And we also had Adam Fletcher on our program, and he went over all the police, the people who were killed, and there was no redress there. So there's a certain amount of feedback in our community, but they never reaches high places. And again,
I agree with you there.
Stuff like that.
I agree with you there, but I think that sometimes they're also limited by, like, they heard me, but they're just like, I need more. And it's like, I think too that the way that society is now, everybody's so worried about protecting, because everybody's worried about like being able to speak up. Like, I was scared to death. And again, I got 15 legal letters to prove it. So I think that this is a complicated, like, I'm agreeing with you, but I'm disagreeing with you. I think that I want to give them, I don't give them a lot of credit, but I want to give them a little credit.
Yeah, and I give them a little credit too. I got a number of tickets over the years, so that I even got some what they call some tickets that they basically just didn't give me a ticket, like those were.
Oh no, I was talking about the media. I was just talking about the media.
Yeah, I don't know anybody.
I'm gonna give them that much.
Okay, you give more respect than I can. I think our community looks like it does because of part of what goes on in our media also. Other feedback. We got about 4 minutes left, and somebody else want to raise a question or comment. Someone who probably hasn't said anything.
I would like to raise the comment that, we should recognize, and we have to figure out how do we oppose it and do something about the media, our elected officials, from our mayor on down in the city of Omaha, is police, police, police. And how do we bring some of this injustice? What can we do? Because just as you said, Ozma, there's been times that things have happened. When Fletcher talked about it, the people that have been killed, the people that have been abused. Just recently, when the police officer stepped on the foot and the ankle of a young lady, and it had to be ACLU, they know what the problem, they know what the Omaha Police Department is about. And I used to say, well, there's some good. Well, there may be good, but if you stand by and allow the things that are going on and you don't do anything about them, then you're just as bad as those that do it because you condone it. And how do you fight the police contract union? Because that's powerful and that's what make it. And every time it comes to have to be decided on the contract, it's the same elected officials and those that are involved, the mayor and so forth, that continuously give the Omaha Police Department power.
Well, I can tell you from the perspective of that is that you have to start one by getting the right mayor in that will negotiate a contract that doesn't allow the union to have so much say so on what you do and do not learn. And secondly, the mayor can also release that data that is not protected under and I don't think there's any data that's protected under the union contract. So again, Gene, let's let those numbers go. You have the right. I mean, we could sit there and say Todd doesn't do this and Todd doesn't do that because he doesn't, but Todd also has a boss, and that boss is the mayor, and the mayor is failing to protect you as well. And I think you need to take that into consideration as well, because she's very well aware of these conversations. I've talked to Bernard repeatedly, Bernard Endenbosch, city attorney. He's very well aware of my concerns. I've asked for meetings with the mayor. I wanted to talk about how internal affairs is not working. I wanted to talk about many things, and she will not even listen. So I think if you want to start somewhere, start with electing the right mayor, and then she can hire the right chief. But other than that, until then, that contract's going to stay, and I think we'd have to sue over like breaching that contract, which, so then it's going to require, and you have to remember, OPOA is now going for longer and longer contracts. So we used to do like a 2-year contract, and then they said, well, the costs are getting more. So then we do like a 3-year contract. Well, then we delay it. So then the mayor will backdate it. So, you know, so that's all part of it. And all those things get lost when you have such a convoluted and negotiation process, that while we want to have fair representation for our employment rights for police officers, because we do have some special needs that you have to take into consideration, but at the same time, accountability could start at the mayor's office, and she could be releasing all this stuff if she chose to. Just FYI.
We're down to our last minute or so. Colleen, do you want to share any closing comments or anything?
No, I'm really excited that, you know, that we've connected, and I look forward to carrying on these conversations if you'll have me back. And I would encourage everybody, like I said, to join me on Twitter, because I'll update update the status of my webpage, and if when I get all the data uploaded, and I've also am going to be doing a couple more podcasts. I think Misfit Moms, I think, is gonna have me on, and then I'm also going to be adding a couple more podcast series to my own that I have on my website. So I would join me on Twitter. I'm at blue_snitch, and I would also check out my website. And again, I'll be updating it here as soon as time allows. But no, I appreciate this, and I would love to come back if you'll have me.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Really appreciate it. Folks, we have an evaluation form you can complete on this event. And also we, in talking with some of our other board members and people, we'll probably have some other events related to police community relations, because you know the 360 meetings, they don't do much in terms of evaluation of their outcomes, in spite of meeting for many years. The 360 meetings is kind of comical, but we'll do more hopefully to bring the community into these conversations. So really appreciate you being with us today. As we always say, may the force be with you in Barocco.
Well, I appreciate being here, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.